r/AskReddit. Emergency service dispatchers. What is the scariest call you have ever gotten? I have two. When I first started out, I worked for a rural county and some areas were very far from help. One night I got a call from a group of people who were in a 3 meters accident and their car caught fire. The girl I was speaking with was stuck in her seatbelt, and as the fire spread she was in terrible amounts of pain. She kept begging me to send help and but it was far away. I stayed with her until the phone dropped, assumingly the phone, and it melted or malfunctioned. The other was a hanging. The father called me for a welfare check, and I was putting in the call when he got to the house. He said the door was unlocked, so I stayed landline while he went inside, and he found his son. The pain in the moment he walked out and told his wife was so horrible and raw. This is why I always have a car escape tool attached to my pant belt. It cuts seat belts and breaks windows with only a light push, spring-loaded and reusable, and has a flashlight on it. I bought one for a bunch of people and they all carelessly lost them, but I still have mine, and know where it is every time I get in a vehicle. Edit. Since multiple people asked the tool I carry is the Swiss Tech Bodyguard. I modified it by using rubber cement over the belt cutter to keep it together a little better. Still easy to pull apart in one motion. It just does not slip off accidentally now, and if it gets wet the light will not turn off until the battery dies. But other than that I have found it sufficient for my needs. I clip it to my belt with a carabiner that has a flashlight on it. I cannot say much about other brands as I have not found a need to buy a different brand, but this one is affordable and effective enough. There may be something better if you shop around, but I'm not certain. I bought one for everybody that has a car in my family and urge them to either put it on their keychain or in their car where it can easily be reached when in a sinking vehicle and secured so it does not go flying off where they cannot reach it. If I do not see it, when I get in their car I ask them where it is every time and remind them that there will be no time for now where did I put that thing. When trapped in a sinking or burning car, I ordered mine online and tested it with the recommend method that came with the instructions, pressing it down on a stack of newspapers, and they replaced the one defective one that came in the mail with a new one free of charge. Edit 2. Since this is getting so much attention I feel I should add another suggestion. Everybody should have an emergency kit in their vehicle. It should have basic supplies for getting your vehicle unstuck, such as a bag of kitty litter, first aid, a day or two worth of food and water, blankets, etc. Just basic emergency supplies in case you get stranded in the snow or somewhere far from home. If your car gets buried in snow make sure the exhaust pipe does not get plugged, as you can get gassed to death if the exhaust cannot escape. I also recommend the book Idiot's Guide's Auto Repair and Maintenance by Dave Stribling. If you do not know anything about cars, read through this book and keep it in your emergency kit for reference. It could save you money, headaches, and maybe even your life one day. Edit 3. Also first aid classes are not a bad idea, or at the very least perhaps consider getting the book First Aid Manual by American College of Emergency Physicians. Read through it so you absorb as much information as you can, then keep it in the car for reference in case you cannot remember exactly what it said in a given situation. I also urge everybody to consider making an EDC, everyday carry, which is a basic pocket-sized survival kit for any type of random emergencies. A good knife and a cheap lighter are good options. Personally I have big pockets. I wear Gillette Trading Co clothing, which is built for utility value, and carry a pocket first aid kit, a couple of lighters, a good flashlight, my phone, credit card, a good knife, duct tape, glue, cordage, and a few other things. It could save your life and takes almost no effort once you have the EDC set up. Check your EDC every day before leaving home. One that always sticks with me is the guy who phoned to tell me he'd shot himself in the head. He was slurring his words and sounded drunk. But no, he'd actually shot himself in the head and was dead by the time the crew got there. That was a weird one to get my head around. I also took a call from a 15-year-old kid who came home from school to find his dad hanging. So I had to basically ask him if he was cold. Could he cut him down? Or the usual, while this poor kid was panicking to hell. And then the kid stops answering my questions, and the dispatcher next to me gets the emergency call from the neighbors saying they don't know what's going on, but there's a kid standing in the street just screaming. I think about that poor kid a lot, and I absolutely detest his father for doing that to him, when he knew his son would be the one who'd find him. Probably the other one that stands out is the call from the woman who'd just been raped. She'd been coming home from a club, and someone had pushed through her door behind her as she unlocked it. When he left, she called me. I still remember the way she screamed when she heard knocking on her door again, and I had to yell at her to try to make her understand it was the police, and not the guy coming back. I didn't sleep well after that night shift at all. My kid's sister got a call last year from her best friend when he came home from school and found his dad unconscious and bleeding out in the tub. I'm incredibly proud of her because she walked him through putting pressure on the wounds and keeping his dad warm while she was also on another phone to the paramedics. Then when the paramedics arrived, she told her friend to make sure the back door was unlocked, and she went over and cleaned up the blood so the kid and his mum didn't have to deal with it. From the last time I answered this, a woman called, screaming her head off, that she had driven into a body of water. Her car was filling up with water. She couldn't open the door. She didn't know where she was, etc. Kids in the car. We're all going to die. Meanwhile I'm like, what the fuck do I do now? Try to find out details about where she is. We know she can see a massive shopping center, but it could be anywhere even remotely close to that. Local units all fan out to the different large ponds/streams etc. It could be. Call the Coast Guard and Marine Support units to help. Try to find out what kind of body of water it is, how big it is etc. And she is just too panicked to answer any questions whatsoever. Managed to get the registration of her vehicle and that was it. Turned out she had driven into a flooded road, flooded from rain, not anywhere near an actual body of water. Absolutely zero danger of the water going past her knees. Caller, muffled voice. Me, I can't understand you. What's the location of the emergency? Caller, sounding clearer, like Kermit the Frog ****GIVES address. I'm going to hang myself. Me, sir, we can help you. Talk to me. What's been happening? Caller, I just want you to move my body before my family get back. Me, please, there's nothing that can't be. Crack gargling silence. I had to stay on the line until I heard police on scene. He had a hands-free kit on. I wasn't even allowed 5 minutes break. I had a breakdown after. I can't describe those sounds. Haunts me to this day. I cannot describe the feeling of being so intimately involved in the moment of such a traumatic death. He gave his pain to me. Edit for context. Suicidal calls and death were common. Part of the job. But this was so sudden. I was the last voice he heard. Also it was 2 AM on Christmas Day. I was wearing a Santa hat. Looking forward to seeing my family. I had to cancel and went home. Spent the day alone and shaking. I can't share this with people I know. I don't want to spread his pain further. Now I have PTSD. Yay. Hey, you don't have to bear it alone. You can talk about it. You should talk about it. I know you don't want to spread his pain further, but perhaps if we all took a little of that burden from you, the pain can be divided into tiny little bits that each person can hold on to. It might not feel so heavy if the load is shared. My PMS are open if you want to talk to literally anyone. Stay strong, friend. Edit. Wow. I'm completely humbled by the responses here. Thank you to everyone who took part in this thread, and thank you to Op for sharing your story. Coming back and reading everyone's responses brought real physical tears to my eyes, and I'm so grateful to be a part of a world with people like you guys in it. Love you all. So I took 10, went for a ciggy to calm down. The duty manager found me and told me how busy we were. I told her what had happened. I shit you not, her response was man up. She was the hardest manager. So she made me get back on the phones. The next call was a regular, called maybe 10 times a day, saying her teeth felt funny. I told her she was being ridiculous and hung up on her. An hour later the DM comes back through crying, said she tried to listen to the call, but had to stop. Said she was so sorry. Gave me the rest of the day off. A week later I was given a written warning for telling the regular she was ridiculous. I never received counseling. I ended up having a pretty nasty breakdown and tried to kill myself and had to leave. I'm doing great now though, just finished a microelectronic engineering degree. But this still haunts me. Whenever a friend has a crisis I panic thinking they'll do something like this. But it gets better with time. Thank you for your concern. You are beautiful. There was an accident once on a somewhat busy state road here. An older couple in and south pulled out onto the road without seeing a motorcyclist that was going well over 100 miles per hour. He rear-ended them, died instantly and plowed through the SUV, landing halfway through the windshield. The SUV flipped a couple times and landed on the passenger side, trapping the wife. Then it caught on fire. At my dispatch center we had 3 of us working at all times, and I don't even know how many 911 calls we instantly got when this happened. Dozens, I'm sure. After I sent the FD, and they got on the way. This is a rural area and this intersection was probably a good 10 minutes south of them. Some bystanders managed to get the husband out of the SUV, but he died in the helicopter on the way to the hospital, I believe. The wife burned alive. Honestly the worst part was right after I dispatched the FD, one of the lieutenants on the biggest police department in my county happened to be driving through there with his family and he called 911. I'll never forget how panicked and frantic he was on that call. I had never heard any of our officers like that before, let alone one of the administrators. We were pretty friendly with all of them so it shook me up. After I hung up with him, I just started sobbing. I was an alarm dispatcher for about a year. Scariest I had was during the night shift. I had a woman whose alarm went off while she and her daughter were asleep. She grabbed her daughter and ran into her room and locked the door. She had a gun. The woman said she did not know why it went off and requested we dispatch the police. Protocol for the company I was with was for us to stay on the line with them while a seat neighbor called the police for us. About 30 seconds after we began the call for the police, she said the door handle was being jiggled from the outside and stopped after a few attempts. She kept saying she was going to go out there, no matter how many times I told her to stay in the room. Last 30 seconds of the call she was not responding. I hung up with her and called the police back and asked what was going on. They advised that police were on scene. Worst part about that job was not knowing what happened after we hung up. Glad I'm not there anymore. When I was younger, I applied to be a 911 operator for the city I was living in Northern California. I got through most of their tests and interviews, which there were numerous. The pool of applicants was over 200 for about 8 positions. I got down to the last dozen applicants then they played some recordings for us. The recording I listened to was a young girl calling 911 from inside a closet. She was crying and hysterical saying that her dad was in the house with a gun and was going to kill her mom. You could hear the mother screaming in the background and the operator was really calm and collected. She got the little girl to keep her voice down and whisper and tried to keep her on the line. You could hear the gunshots in the background. I couldn't listen to it anymore. I didn't want to find out what happened next, so I don't know the outcome. I knew I couldn't handle that then. I don't think I could take something like that now. A little late to the thread, and not exactly what is being looked for from the question, but I was training to be an EMT, and was on a ride along. We show up to the scene and the only thing told to us was that it was a load and go, which meant rapid transport. I find the guy, and he is making a wheezing noise trying to breathe. Turns out he had a brain bleed, and was having severe symptoms of high intracranial pressure. The ride to the nearest trauma center was only about 10 minutes, but it felt like 10 hours as we just tried to keep him from choking on his own vomit. With something like that, we couldn't really do much, except hope we made it in time. It was definitely a wild experience for a ride along, and the craziest part was just cleaning up all the blood and vomit in the ambulance and quickly moving on to our next call. It's definitely not something I'll ever forget in my lifetime. Obligatory not an emergency dispatcher. I had a conversation with one once where we discussed his craziest work stories, and his was taking the call of a man who had just drowned his two small daughters in a lake near their house. He had to stay on the phone with this sociopath, asking him questions about the time and location of the murders until the police arrived to take him into custody. He never did find out if they ever found the children or if either of them survived in the end. I've come into contact with a fair number of sexual predators / child molesters in my line of work, but I never had to interact with them immediately after their crimes and press them for details. It's a lot to ask of someone. I've always had a lot of respect for emergency dispatchers and the folks who run abuse, rape, and suicide hotlines. One of the scariest / most memorable calls was probably when I had to stay on the phone with the father of a barricaded subject, army vet, while they relayed to me what they were able to see through the in-home security footage. The wife of the subject went to the house of the father of the barricaded subject without telling the subject because she saw him, the subject, standing over their baby girl with a gun the day before. We had to put out an all-points bulletin to notify the surrounding area that he left the house at one point, possibly going to find his wife and daughter. He went back home and started tearing the house up and smashing things. I had to hear from my officers that he was shooting at them from inside his house. Eventually, we got him out without anyone getting injured. I ended up having to be on the phone for a solid 4.5 hours, unable to hang up and unable to go to the restroom or leave when my shift ended. I tried to block out the calls that I listened to people kill themselves and others. Not me, but someone that shared their story one day. They received a call from a woman whispering down her phone stating that there were intruders in her house. She was hiding down the side of her bed. They were downstairs and she was upstairs in her bedroom. She kept quiet for 10 minutes, keeping the call handler updated through whispering. She then told the handler the men were coming up the stairs. Next thing the handler hears is a woman saying, "Please don't hurt me." The handler hears a noise that sounds like a scuffle and voices, but can't quite hear what they are saying. Then it suddenly goes completely silent. Except there's this noise that sounds like the wind blowing through an object, followed by a quiet gurgling noise. Turns out the wind noise was the sound of the poor woman trying to breathe through her lacerated windpipe, and the gurgling was the blood forming bubbles as the air pumped up from her lungs, pushing it out through the wound in her neck. The intruders had decided to slit her throat upon finding her and then continue to rob the house. That story left me with a bad feeling for the rest of the day. Former dispatcher, retired due to depression, but that's a whole other story. Nearly 10 years at that job, I don't remember what it's like to feel genuine joy without chemical assistance, but fortunately most of the calls have faded into a background noise of sorrow. The very first 911 call I ever heard on the job was 1 week into my employment, without any formal training at that point. Call was over in less than 30 seconds. "Hello, what is your emergency? There are people in my house. Address." I hear a crackle on the phone. Line goes dead. Supervisor immediately takes over and sends out a code 3 response to the address. Turned out to be a home invasion. Caller had been tied up, escaped, got to a phone, and made the call before being shot, dying instantly. Culprits were in the wind by the time cops arrived, but were later arrested, tried, and convicted. Not the worst thing I ever heard, if you can believe it, but considering my lack of training and experience at that point, it will always be the scariest. My brother used to do dispatch. He told me about 3 stories that messed him up. The first was a call from a man in a rural area whose wife had a heart attack. He said all you could hear while the man performed CPR was him sobbing, "Please don't leave me, you can't leave me yet." She died. The next one was a mother who walked in on her son, who was in process of committing suicide by hanging. He was still alive and kicking, and the mom froze. My brother desperately tried to get her to cut him down or put a chair under him or something while police and medical responded, but she didn't. He died. The last one was a call from a 4-year-old who wanted help because her dad was beating her mom on her birthday. She hid in a closet and called, and he tried to talk to her to figure out her name and address and stuff. Before he could get info to get anywhere, her dad found her. All he heard was yelling before the phone call ended. He's had more that I'm sure were difficult, but these are the ones that gave him nightmares. I still think about them regularly tbh. Gee, thanks bro for sharing. Nearing the end of a rather uneventful night shift, I took a call from a young lady who frantically announced that she was going into labor. There was nobody there with her, her apartment door was locked, and it was apparent that delivery was imminent. Childbirth calls are quite rare for emergency medical dispatchers. They are said to be once in a career occurrences. We are nonetheless trained for this, so when the call does come, we are prepared to help the caller through delivery of the baby. What I wasn't prepared for, however, was helping a would-be mother deliver her own baby. Thankfully, by the time I finished obtaining all the GR validation information and pertinent medical history, a few minutes into the call, I could hear someone knocking on her door. It was her sister, but she couldn't get in because the door was locked. The caller insisted she was not able to unlock the door on account of her being in active labor. I managed to convince her to crawl to the door to let the person in, and she painstakingly did so, while voicing her discomfort in the form of various moans, grunts, and profanities. She finally let the other person in and handed the phone to the visitor. Relieved because I now knew what to do, I started providing the preparatory instructions: gather pillows, towels, blankets, removing clothing from the waist down, etc. But there was no time for prep. That baby was coming, and it was coming now. OMG, the head is out, I remember hearing, followed by her shrieking, oh shit, oh shit. The cord is wrapped around the neck. I instructed her to attempt to loosen the cord and slip it over the head, and she was able to. Within moments, baby was born. But baby was limp, blue, and not breathing. After what felt like minutes, but was likely only a few seconds, I decided to advise the caller that she would need to start doing chest compressions. Thankfully, before any of that started, I could hear the reassuring sound of a baby crying on the other end of the phone. With excitement in her voice, she announced that baby was moving, and the color was improving. It was a baby boy, and he was alive. The paramedics arrived, and I congratulated the caller before disconnecting the call. By this time, it was past the end of the shift, and the day crew had logged on at all the desks except mine. Instead of going home, the night crew had gathered around my desk to watch me take this call. After disconnecting, I was met with cheers from my colleagues. During my next shift, I was informed that baby was healthy, and I was presented with a congratulatory letter and a little blue stork pin. Take a call of domestic, get officers en route, keep the caller on the phone asking questions about weapons in the house. Yes. Does he have any? No. Are you on a cordless phone? No. Keep her talking until the officer gets there. Officer on scene. Caller sends daughter out first. Officer on portable telling us what's going on. The caller disconnects to leave the house. Officer screaming on the radio. Shots fired. Shots fired. Actor had a handgun tucked into his back pocket. As the wife/GF went to leave, he stepped behind her and shot her in the head. Took a shot at the daughter, missed, and shot at the officer, missed, before jumping back in the house. SWAT called, officers enter residence. Actor had barricaded himself in the back bedroom, was laying on the bed, waiting to officers hit as they entered. Officer survived, actor did not, and the GF he shot did not survive. A few stand out, but the first one that comes to mind was a young woman who called in because she was hearing noises outside at night. I got her address and information. She was relatively calm at this point, but a few seconds later she saw there was someone outside in her yard coming up onto her porch. She's getting more freaked out. I'm telling her PD is already on the way. I've taken dozens of calls like this, and usually once they realize someone is awake they run off. This guy didn't. There was a loud crash. She starts this high-pitched scream and stops responding to me on the phone. Turns out the guy smashed through her front window. She dropped the phone and ran to the bathroom. PD got on scene quickly, thank God, and found the guy still hung up in the window. She was okay, just freaked out. He went to jail, but that crash and scream are sounds that stick with you. You kinda become numb to things after a while. What would be scary for most people is just normal for most of us. It's a stressful job, and at our agency we both take the calls and work the radio at the same time, so sometimes you may take 100 to 200 calls in a shift. It's impossible to remember them all, so the ones that do are usually either really bad or really funny. Thank you so much for watching the whole video. Please leave a like and subscribe.